Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood before the Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Consortium, her weathered hands steady on the podium despite the crushing pressure of 10,000 years of alien civilization staring down at her. The chamber itself was a testament to the consortium's technological superiority, a perfect sphere of quantum crystalline architecture that seemed to defy the laws of physics, floating in the void of space like a soap bubble that refused to pop. The Arcturian High Commander, Zixtal, towered over his podium, his crystalline form refracting light in patterns that humans had learned to recognize as smug condescension. "Dr. Mitchell," his translator rendered in crisp English, "you expect us to believe that your species, barely a century into faster-than-light travel, has something to teach the consortium about military strategy." Sarah fought back a smile. She'd expected this reaction when Earth Command sent her to present their defense proposals. The consortium species had spent millennia perfecting their art of war, reducing it to pure mathematics, clean algorithms, and perfect predictions. They saw human warfare as primitive, messy, unpredictable. They weren't wrong about the last part. "Commander," she replied, keeping her voice level, "I expect you to consider that different perspectives might offer valuable insights, especially given the recent attacks on your outer colonies." A ripple of discomfort passed through the chamber. The Valerians, gaseous beings contained within shimmering environmental fields, pulsed with anxiety. The crystalline Arcturians vibrated in frequencies that suggested irritation. Even the usually stoic Mentherians, with their silicon-based neural networks, displayed signs of distress through subtle color changes in their metallic skin. Those incidents, Zixtal's second-in-command, Valix, cut in, are being handled according to established protocols. Our defensive algorithms are being adjusted to account for an enemy that keeps changing its attack patterns faster than your algorithms can adapt. Sarah interrupted, bringing up a holographic display of the most recent raids. These quantum phase raiders aren't following any predictable pattern. That's why your defenses are failing. The display showed the devastation wrought on 3 consortium colonies in the past month. Perfect defensive formations, impeccable response patterns, all shattered by an enemy that seemed to rewrite its own tactical handbook with each engagement. Our models are based on 10,000 years of warfare analysis, Zixtal countered, his crystalline form now pulsing with what Sarah had learned to recognize as anger. They account for every possible variation of tactical approach. Every logical variation, Sarah corrected. Every pattern that follows mathematical principles. But what if you're facing an enemy that deliberately introduces chaos into their strategy? What if unpredictability itself is their pattern? The Valerian representative, Ambassador Mist, drifted forward in their containment field. Dr. Mitchell suggests we abandon proven methodologies in favor of human intuition. The translator couldn't quite capture the mixture of disbelief and disdain in their harmonic speech. Sarah loaded another simulation. "What I'm suggesting is adaptation. Look at this analysis of the Raiders' attack on Outpost Gamma 9. The hologram showed a perfect consortium defense grid, each ship positioned according to mathematical principles refined over millennia. Then came the Raiders, their quantum phase ships sliding through space like oil on water, their movements jarring and unpredictable. Your defense grid predicted 97 possible attack vectors," Sarah continued. "The Raiders used none of them. Instead, they did this." The simulation showed the Raiders executing a series of seemingly random maneuvers that left the consortium fleet firing at empty space, while their targets slipped through gaps that shouldn't have existed. A primitive approach, Valix dismissed. Lacking elegance or strategic sophistication. A primitive approach that destroyed one of your most fortified outposts, Sarah countered. Sometimes sophistication is just another word for predictability. And you believe human military doctrine could have prevented this? Zixtal's tone made it clear what he thought of human military anything. Sarah squared her shoulders. "I believe that humanity's greatest military strength is precisely what you consider our greatest weakness, our unpredictability. Our ability to improvise, to think laterally, to make intuitive leaps that defy pure logic. She brought up one final display, a simulation of her proposed hybrid defense strategy. We don't need to abandon your proven methodologies. We need to complement them. Combine your mathematical precision with human adaptability. Create a defense that can't be predicted because it evolves in real time. The chamber erupted in overlapping translations as multiple species tried to speak at once. The Arcturians vibrated in frequencies that threatened to shatter lesser materials. The Valerians pulsed in patterns that suggested everything from outrage to panic. The Mentherians' metallic skin rippled with complex color patterns that their fellow consortium members clearly found disturbing. Enough. Zixtal's command cut through the chaos. Dr. Mitchell, while we appreciate Earth's enthusiasm in offering assistance, the consortium has defended galactic civilization since before your species discovered fire. We will adjust our algorithms. We will optimize our response patterns. We will handle this threat as we have handled all others, through the application of proven, tested, and properly documented methodologies. Sarah gathered her data crystals, keeping her expression neutral even as frustration burned in her chest. Of course, Commander. I'm sure your algorithms will provide great comfort to the next colony that gets raided. As she turned to leave, a subtle movement caught her eye. One of the Mentherian observers, their metallic skin shifting in patterns that suggested deep thought, made a gesture that her xenocultural training identified as recognition of potential validity. It wasn't much, but it was something. The consortium's perfect defenses were failing against an enemy that refused to play by their rules. Sooner or later, they'd have to acknowledge that sometimes the most logical choice was to embrace a little chaos. Sarah just hoped they'd reach that conclusion before more colonies paid the price for their pride. As she walked out of the chamber, her communicator chimed with an emergency alert. Another raid was in progress, this time closer to the consortium's core worlds. She paused, watching the perfect formations of the consortium fleet move to intercept according to their time-tested protocols, and watched as those perfect formations shattered against an enemy that cared nothing for the proper rules of warfare. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, the most valuable lessons came from failure. She just wondered how many failures it would take before the consortium learned this one. 3 days after her presentation to the Council, Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood in the Tactical Observation Center of Outpost Delta 7, watching another perfect defense crumble. The holographic display showed the consortium's fleet executing textbook maneuvers against an enemy that had never read their textbooks. Sixth Fleet is maintaining Formation Alpha 7, reported Lieutenant Chen, her liaison with Earth Command. The Arcturians are refusing to deviate from their predetermined response patterns. Sarah watched as the quantum phase raiders tore through the consortium's defenses like water through tissue paper. Their ships moved with a fluidity that defied conventional tactical analysis, shifting between attack patterns seemingly at random. But something about their movements nagged at her consciousness. "Run it again," she ordered, fingers dancing across the holographic controls. "But this time, filter out all standard tactical markers. Show me just the raw movement data." The display shifted, reducing the battle to pure vectors and energy signatures. The consortium fleet's movements appeared as rigid geometric patterns, beautiful in their mathematical precision. The raiders, in contrast, seemed to flow across space like oil on water, their patterns organic, almost natural. Sarah breathed, understanding finally clicking into place. They're not using random patterns at all. They're mimicking natural phenomena. Chen leaned forward, squinting at the display. "Ma'am." Sarah's fingers flew across the controls, overlaying various natural pattern analyses onto the raiders' movement data. "Look here. This attack run follows the same pattern as a river delta. And this evasive maneuver, it's identical to the way smoke curls around obstacles. They're using nature itself as their tactical handbook. A handbook the consortium would never think to read." Chen realized, eyes widening. Their whole military doctrine is built on geometric perfection. They'd never look for patterns in something as chaotic as nature. Sarah was already compiling the data, preparing to present her findings to the council. Then she paused, remembering their dismissal of her previous insights. No, she needed more than just theory this time. She needed proof. "Lieutenant, what's the status of the research vessel Magellan?" Chen checked his datapad. "Docked at Station 9. Running standard maintenance." "Why?" "Because we're going to need a ship that can track these raiders without being detected. And the Magellan's quantum sensors might just be able to confirm my theory." The next 12 hours were a blur of activity. Sarah called in every favor she'd accumulated in her years of working with the consortium, securing clearance for the Magellan to operate in contested space. The ship's captain, a veteran named Rodriguez who'd seen enough battles to respect unconventional thinking, listened to her theory without dismissal. "So you think these raiders are basically copying nature's homework?" he asked, examining the pattern analysis she'd compiled. "Nature's been optimizing movement and energy patterns for billions of years," Sarah explained. "What better source for unpredictable yet efficient tactical solutions? The consortium's problem is they've spent so long perfecting artificial patterns that they've forgotten how to see natural ones." Rodriguez nodded slowly. "And you think we can predict their next target by looking for natural pattern formations in quantum space? That's what we're going to find out." The Magellan slipped away from Station 9 under the cover of a routine sensor suite. Sarah had installed specialized processing algorithms in the ship's computers, designed to look for natural pattern signatures in quantum space. It was a shot in the dark, but sometimes those were the only shots worth taking. For 3 days, they tracked the quantum wake signatures left by the raider ships, mapping them against natural phenomena. Each attack, each movement, corresponded to some pattern found in nature: river systems, crystal growth patterns, even the way neurons branched in living brains. They're not just copying nature, Sarah realized, studying the accumulated data. They're learning from it, adapting its patterns in real time. That's why the consortium's predictive algorithms keep failing. They're trying to predict something that's constantly evolving. The breakthrough came during their analysis of the raiders' fourth attack. Sarah's natural pattern recognition algorithms detected a familiar signature forming in quantum space, one that matched the flow patterns of a river system about to breach its banks. "They're going to hit the Arcturian colony on Nexus Prime," she announced, the prediction crystallizing in her mind with absolute certainty. "Within the next 12 hours. Rodriguez studied the data skeptically. The consortium's analysis puts their next target in the opposite direction. They've got 3 battle fleets positioned to intercept. Because the consortium is looking for logical patterns, Sarah insisted. But if you look at the quantum flow signatures, they're forming the same patterns as the Ganges River Delta just before monsoon season. The raiders are going to flow right around those fleets and hit Nexus Prime from an angle the consortium considers tactically impossible." She transmitted her findings to Earth Command, knowing they'd be forwarded to the consortium council. The response was swift and predictable. "The council has reviewed your analysis," Chen reported, reading from his datapad with carefully controlled frustration. "They say, and I quote, 'Natural pattern analysis is an interesting but ultimately primitive approach that fails to account for the sophisticated tactical realities of modern warfare.'" Sarah watched the quantum flow patterns continuing to form, knowing with bone-deep certainty that she was right. "How many people live on Nexus Prime, Lieutenant?" 8 million colonists. "Then we better hope someone on that council starts appreciating primitive approaches real soon." She turned to Rodriguez. "Captain, how fast can the Magellan reach Nexus Prime?" Rodriguez smiled grimly. "Not fast enough to stop an attack, but maybe fast enough to prove a point. Plot the course. Even if we can't prevent the attack, we can document it. Show the council that sometimes the most sophisticated approach is learning to read patterns they spent millennia ignoring." As the Magellan adjusted course for Nexus Prime, Sarah watched the quantum flow patterns continuing to develop. The consortium's mighty battle fleets were preparing to defend against an attack that would never come, while nature itself was telling anyone willing to listen where the real threat would appear. Sometimes the greatest weaknesses came not from lack of advancement, but from advancing so far that you forgot the fundamental patterns that govern the universe. Sarah just hoped the Council would learn that lesson before more lives were lost to their pride. The attack on Nexus Prime unfolded exactly as Sarah had predicted. The Magellan sensors recorded everything, the raiders emerging from quantum space in a pattern that mimicked water flowing around stones, the colony's defenses shattering under an assault that came from an impossible vector, and the desperate evacuation of millions as their carefully constructed world burned. Transmission from Earth Command. Lieutenant Chen reported, his voice tight. The Consortium Council is calling an emergency session. Sarah barely heard him, her attention fixed on the casualty reports scrolling across her display. 2 million dead or missing. If the Consortium had just listened. They're not calling it to admit they were wrong, she said finally, turning away from the grim statistics. They're calling it to reinforce their protocols, to assert that the solution is more rigidity, not less. Rodriguez, who hadn't left the bridge since they'd arrived to witness the devastation, cleared his throat. We're also receiving requests for our sensor data. The Arcturians want to analyze our recordings of the attack, so they can explain why it was impossible after it happened. Sarah's laugh held no humor. How many more colonies have to fall before they accept that their perfect protocols are killing people? The emergency session was worse than she'd expected. The council chamber buzzed with competing theories, each species offering their own mathematical explanation for why their defenses had failed. None of them mentioned Sarah's natural pattern analysis. The quantum phase raiders clearly decoded our defensive algorithms, Zixtal declared, his crystalline form vibrating with certainty. We must increase encryption complexity by at least 3 orders of magnitude. With respect, Commander, Sarah interrupted, they didn't decode anything. They ignored your algorithms completely. They're using patterns you refuse to see. Dr. Mitchell, Valix cut in. While your presence during the Nexus Prime incident is appreciated, your continued insistence on primitive pattern recognition saved my ship and crew. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, his weathered face set in stern lines. We knew exactly where the raiders would strike, because Dr. Mitchell read the patterns you're all too sophisticated to consider. A ripple of dismissive harmonics swept through the chamber. The Valerians pulsed with what their cultural databases labeled as patronizing amusement. Even the Mentharians, who'd shown hints of interest in her theories, maintained diplomatic silence. Sarah had seen enough. Computer, display tactical analysis of all raider attacks to date. The holographic display filled with movement patterns, each one matched to its natural counterpart. River systems, atmospheric turbulence, crystal growth patterns. The raiders had turned nature itself into their tactical handbook. They're not using random chaos, she explained, her voice cutting through the chamber's skeptical murmuring. They're using patterns that evolved over billions of years. Patterns that are unpredictable not because they're random, but because they're infinitely complex. And you propose we abandon 10,000 years of tactical doctrine to embrace natural chaos. Zixtal's translator couldn't quite capture the scorn in his harmonic speech. Sarah straightened. I propose we stop dying with elegant precision and start surviving with adaptive chaos. Enough. Valix's crystalline form pulsed with authority. The Council appreciates Earth's concern, but we will handle this threat according to established protocols. Your presence here is no longer required. Sarah stood still for a long moment, weighing choices and consequences. Then she touched her communicator. Lieutenant Chen, execute Project Undertow. Alarms blared throughout the chamber as quantum signatures appeared on the tactical displays. A fleet of ships, their energy patterns masked to mimic natural phenomena, decloaked around the council station. What is the meaning of this? Zixtal demanded as the chamber erupted in chaos. That, Sarah said quietly, is the Earth's 7th experimental fleet. For the past month, they'd been shadowing your patrols, using the same natural patterns as the raiders. Your sensors never detected them because you never thought to look for ships moving like river currents or wind patterns. The display showed the Earth ships flowing through space in organic patterns that seemed to defy military logic. They slipped through gaps in the station's defensive grid that shouldn't have existed, their movements fluid and unpredictable. You dare threaten the Council? Valex's voice carried both outrage and a hint of fear. We dare to show you what you refuse to see, Sarah corrected. Every one of those ships could have been a raider. Your defenses are failing not because they're not sophisticated enough, but because they're too sophisticated to see simple truths. She brought up a new tactical display, showing a predicted attack pattern forming in quantum space. The raiders will hit the Valerian colony on Helios 3 in less than 6 hours. Their quantum wake is already forming the same patterns as a monsoon system about to break. You can deploy your fleets according to mathematical protocols and watch another colony burn, or you can try something new. The chamber fell silent as the council members studied the display. The patterns were there for anyone willing to see them. Natural, organic, alive in a way that their rigid geometric formations could never be. If we were to. Zixtal's harmonic speech held reluctant curiosity. Consider your approach. How would you propose we proceed? Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes the only way to break through rigid thinking was to demonstrate just how fragile that rigidity could be. First, she said, we need to stop treating space combat like a geometric exercise and start treating it like a living system. The raiders learn to flow like water and wind. We need to learn to flow with them, then against them. She gestured, and the Earth ships began moving in new patterns, their formations shifting like schools of fish responding to predators. We need to combine your technological precision with our adaptive instincts. Create a defense that breathes and flows instead of standing rigid and shattering. The council chamber hummed with overlapping translations as species that had spent millennia perfecting mathematical warfare confronted the possibility that perfection itself was their weakness. Sarah watched them struggle with the concept, knowing that pride and tradition were formidable enemies. But with another colony's survival hanging in the balance, even the most rigid minds could learn to bend rather than break. Sometimes the best way to teach a lesson was to prove that you'd already mastered it yourself. The command center of the Helios Defense Station hummed with an unusual mix of human intuition and consortium precision. Holographic displays showed both the traditional geometric tactical grids and the new natural pattern analysis Sarah had developed. The combination looked chaotic, but there was harmony in the chaos for those willing to see it. The quantum wake patterns are intensifying, Sarah reported, studying the organic flow of data across her screens. They're definitely coming, and they're coming in force. Zixtal, who had insisted on personally overseeing this first joint operation, vibrated in frequencies that suggested both anticipation and discomfort. Our traditional analysis systems cannot make sense of these. Natural patterns you insist are so important. That's because you're trying to force them into geometric frameworks, Sarah explained, manipulating the holographic display. Stop trying to measure the ocean with a ruler. Look at how the patterns flow, how they interact, how they... She trailed off as new data flickered across her screen. The raiders' quantum wake signatures were shifting, adapting, becoming something new. They're learning, she whispered. They're combining their natural patterns with some of your geometric formations. Impossible, Valex declared from his position at the consortium tactical station. Our formations are based on pure mathematical precision. They cannot be merged with chaotic natural phenomena. Sarah's fingers danced across her controls, highlighting the emerging hybrid patterns. Tell that to them. They're evolving their tactics in real time, creating something neither purely natural nor purely geometric. She allowed herself a grim smile. Looks like we're not the only ones who figured out the power of combining approaches. The defense of Helios 3 had become a test case, a proof of concept that would either validate Sarah's theories or prove the consortium's rigid approach correct. The combined human consortium fleet waited in a formation that made both sides uncomfortable, precise enough to satisfy the Arcturians' need for order, fluid enough to adapt like the natural systems Sarah had studied. Multiple quantum ruptures detected, Lieutenant Chen called out. Raiders emerging in patterns I'd never seen before. The tactical display erupted with activity as the raiders appeared. Their ships moved with a grace that seemed to merge the organic flow of river systems with the mathematical precision of crystal growth. It was beautiful in a terrifying way. They're using our own hybrid approach against us, Sarah realized, watching the patterns unfold. Standard consortium countermeasures will. Already failing, Zixtal confirmed, his crystalline form pulsing with concern. Our predictive algorithms cannot process these combined patterns. Sarah's mind raced. If the raiders could combine approaches, so could they. But they'd need to do it faster, better, more intuitively. Captain Rodriguez, deploy the Earth ships in pattern Delta River. Zixtal, have your forces maintain their geometric formation, but allow it to flex according to our movement patterns. Flex. Zixtal's translator made the word sound like a mathematical impossibility. Our formations are based on precise. Your formations are about to be torn apart if they don't learn to bend. Sarah cut in. Trust me. Trust us. Let geometry learn to dance. For a moment, she thought he would refuse. Then his crystalline form shifted to a frequency she'd never seen before. Acceptance of uncertainty, perhaps. Consortium fleet, synchronize with Earth vessel movements. Maintain base geometric patterns, but allow for organic variation. What followed was unlike any battle in the history of either humanity or the consortium. The defenders moved like a living geometry proof, their formations maintaining mathematical precision while flowing like water around the raiders' attacks. When the raiders adapted, the combined fleet adapted faster, human intuition guiding consortium precision in ways neither side had imagined possible. They're trying to establish a resonance pattern, Sarah observed, watching the raiders' movements shift again. They think our hybrid formation will shatter if they match its frequencies. Then let's show them what true resonance looks like, Rodriguez suggested. Lieutenant Chen, signal all Earth ships to execute Waterfall Variation 3. The human ships suddenly broke their pattern, cascading through space like a waterfall splitting around rocks. The consortium ships, instead of maintaining rigid formation, allowed themselves to be pulled along in the wake, their geometric patterns stretching and reforming like elastic fractals. Remarkable, Valix murmured, watching the tactical display. The mathematical harmony is maintained even as the patterns evolve. It's like life itself, Sarah finished. Complex systems maintaining order within chaos, structure within freedom. The raiders, faced with a defense that could match their adaptability while maintaining devastating precision, began to fall back. Their hybrid patterns, impressive as they were, couldn't match the true synthesis of approaches the defenders had achieved. They're retreating, Chen reported, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. All quantum wake signatures showing withdrawal patterns. The command center erupted in a cacophony of celebration. Human cheers mixing with consortium harmonics and a chaotic symphony of victory. Sarah watched the tactical display, seeing not just the retreat of an enemy, but the birth of something new. The rigid lines of consortium formations now flowed like rivers of geometry, while the organic patterns of human ships contained mathematical elegance that would have been impossible weeks ago. Zixtal moved to stand beside her, his crystalline form shimmering with what she hoped was appreciation. It seems, his translator rendered carefully, that there is much our precision can learn from your chaos. Sarah smiled, watching the combined fleet maintain its fluid yet precise formation even in victory. And much our chaos can learn from your precision. Neither of us was wrong about warfare, Zixtal. We were just both incomplete. As the celebration continued around them, Sarah began compiling the battle data. The raiders would be back, probably with even more sophisticated hybrid tactics. But now they faced an enemy that had learned perhaps the greatest military lesson of all, that true strength lies not in rigid perfection or pure adaptability, but in the wisdom to know when to embrace each. The consortium had mocked humanity's primitive approach to warfare. Now they were learning that primitiveness, like sophistication, was merely a matter of perspective. Sometimes the most advanced solution was remembering what the universe had been trying to teach all along, that life itself was a dance between order and chaos, and true mastery meant learning to lead that dance. Deep in the quantum swells of the Helios sector, the largest fleet ever assembled in consortium space waited in a formation that would have been impossible just months ago. Crystalline Arcturian dreadnoughts flowed like liquid geometry alongside nimble human vessels, their combined patterns resembling a river system made of stars. Sarah stood on the bridge of the flagship Synthesis, a hybrid vessel that embodied everything they'd learned. Its quantum engines hummed with consortium precision, while its tactical systems ran on human-designed natural pattern recognition algorithms. Even its crew was mixed. Humans working alongside various consortium species in a harmony few would have thought possible. Multiple quantum wake signatures detected. Lieutenant Chen reported from his station. They're massive. Bigger than anything we've seen before. The Raiders' main fleet, Zixtal confirmed, his crystalline form pulsing with anticipation. The Arcturian commander had become one of their strongest advocates after witnessing the success of their combined approach. Our long-range sensors detect over 3,000 vessels. Sarah studied the quantum flow patterns forming in the space ahead of them. The Raiders had clearly been learning, adapting, evolving their tactics just as the combined fleet had. But there was something else in their formation, something that made her instincts scream warnings. They're not just combining approaches anymore, she realized, watching the pattern shift. They're trying to create a quantum resonance cascade. If they succeed, they could destabilize space-time itself in this sector. Impossible, Valix began, but without his former dismissive tone. The energy requirements alone would be met by using our own defensive patterns against us, Sarah finished. They're not just mimicking nature anymore. They're weaponizing the very principles we've been using to fight them. The Raiders emerged from quantum space like a dark tide, their ships moving in patterns that seemed to bend reality itself. Their formation was a perfect fusion of natural flow and mathematical precision, designed to create devastating harmonic frequencies in the quantum fabric of space. All ships, execute pattern Sigma River, Sarah commanded, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. Zixtal, have your dreadnoughts maintain their geometric anchor points, but allow their formations to breathe with our movements. Breathe, a new Valerian captain asked through their translator. Geometric formations do not. They do now, Zixtal cut in. That's what the humans have taught us. Even perfection must learn to adapt. The combined fleet moved like a living equation, each ship finding its place in a pattern that was both precisely calculated and instinctively felt. The Raiders struck with their quantum harmonics, expecting to shatter their enemy's formation. Instead, they found their energy dissipating through patterns that shifted like smoke while maintaining mathematical harmony. They're trying to establish a resonance lock, Chen reported, his hands flying over his console. If they match our pattern exactly. Then we show them that true harmony isn't about matching patterns, Sarah interrupted. It's about dancing with them. Execute Operation Quantum Dance. The human ships suddenly broke into seemingly chaotic individual movements, each following its own natural pattern, while maintaining subtle mathematical relationships with its neighbors. The consortium vessels, instead of trying to impose order on this chaos, began moving in complementary geometries that amplified the unpredictability while maintaining strategic coherence. The Raiders' quantum harmonic attack, designed to shatter a single unified pattern, found itself trying to resonate with thousands of individual patterns that were somehow also one pattern. It was like trying to create an echo in a room where every surface changed its acoustic properties moment by moment. Their quantum field coherence is destabilizing, Valix reported, his tactical displays showing the raiders' carefully constructed attack falling apart. They cannot maintain their resonance pattern against this level of controlled chaos. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Chaos is just order we haven't learned to see yet. All ships, press the advantage. Show them what true harmony looks like. The combined fleet surged forward, each ship moving with both individual purpose and collective grace. Human vessels darted through gaps in reality that consortium sensors identified, while Arcturian dreadnoughts used their precise geometric formations to create quantum-focusing effects that the humans' natural patterns could exploit. The raiders, their primary strategy failing, tried to adapt, but they had learned to mimic patterns without understanding their true nature. They could copy the dance but couldn't feel its rhythm. Their fleet is fracturing, Chen announced. Quantum wake signatures showing disorganized retreat patterns. Not retreat, Sarah corrected, watching the pattern shift. They're scattering, breaking apart into smaller groups that. The raiders suddenly split into dozens of smaller formations, each adopting different tactical patterns. Some went fully geometric, others purely organic, most trying various combinations. It was a desperate attempt to find something that would work against the combined fleet's perfect imperfection.